The one that sticks out is, of course, the story you've now heard well. I think it's the story of Sophie from Oldham, the 12-year-old girl who went to a police station to report sexual. She'd been sexually assaulted at a graveyard. The police officer handed her over to two Asian men. A police officer handing over a 12-year-old child to two Asian men. I think they were Bangladeshi men, I'm not sure. They gang raped her. She dumped her somewhere. Someone else picked her up, gang raped her. Then someone else took her to a house and gang raped her. And I think for me, what that shows, and no one's connected the dots, and it was awful. What's happened to this kid was awful. And I think it'll be with her forever. But for me, what that demonstrates isn't just the police's role in failing to safeguard a child because he held a working class child with contempt. It wouldn't have happened with a middle class child in that sort of sense. But what I look at that is it's not a series of coincidences. That was a cultural sort of norm for that to happen to that child. It's not a coincidence she gets gang raped 3 times in one night. Someone stops her for help, so someone is meant to help her, another person is meant to help her, another person is meant to help her. And for me, that shows that there is an issue within my community. It's one of the reasons I do this work, where we need to address our own challenges, our own issues, our own prejudices within our own community towards these children. Because what would you have done if you found a 12-year-old child late at night on a street? I know what I would have done. It would be to take care of her. It would be to take her to the hospital. It'd be to take her home. It'd be to do something like that. It wouldn't be to, let me phone my mates up and we can have some fun. And that's not an accident. I think I'm trying to say to you is that's not an accident. That is a cultural aspect. It's a norm. And where did that norm come from? And I talk about this. I'm here talking to you guys about this. I talk about this in the place I come from, and I'm ostracized.
Yeah.
I'm demonized and I'm ostracized. I'm assaulted. Why? Because I know in the communities I come from, there's an issue. Now, I don't know if it comes from the Quran. I don't know if it comes from a place of prejudice of simply race. It might come from a combination of both. I don't know the answers. But I know not talking about it is not going to get us anywhere. And not talking about it from a minority point of view, I'm sorry. All that will happen is people like me and the communities I came from will become increasingly demonized, increasingly looked upon negatively. For crying out loud, mate, the Home Secretary stood up in Parliament last week and made reference to Pakistani heritage rape gangs, essentially. Yeah. That's the Home Secretary saying that.
Who's the Home Secretary now? What's his name?
Yvette Cooper.
That's
a Labour.
Shocking.
Yeah,
That's
it's a Labour Home
yeah.
Secretary. But look, this has now entered the mainstream discourse. This is now a senior politician saying that. So this is no longer an extreme viewpoint. This is the viewpoint held by the majority of this country, that there is an issue within our communities, whether it's the Pakistani community, whether it's the Bangladesh, whether it's the Muslim, whatever identity label you want to use, there's a challenge we've got here. And if we don't deal with it, all that will happen, because I know what the politicians will do. They'll exploit the situation, demonize you, make it out like, they need to protect us. And that's not, it might work short term for them to stay in power, but long term, it's going to rip our nation apart.
Why do you think the police are so reluctant to do anything when it comes to grooming gangs?
I spoke to a very senior retired police officer today, Detective Chief Inspector, a former DCI. He now works in international child protection sort of charities. So, what's it called? Child trafficking. He started his journey when he was working with children in care homes. When the police were getting reports. He reported it. He was senior enough to try and tackle it. He went to Bradford and found, recorded all of it and all the rest of it. They called him to a meeting in social services. Police officer and a senior level child protection officer from the council, a head of social services or something. Long and short of it, they said he was causing the issues by looking out for these children. And then he got a phone call afterwards from a very, very senior police officer. And it was, you will cause damage to community relations. And I think that is the undercurrent as to why the police are reluctant to act. They believe that if they act, it'll trigger a far-right response, which is outrageous and wrong, because I think by not acting, it is making the situation far worse.
So do you think the idea that it's going to cause increased community tensions is merely a front? Could it be an excuse as to why they're not doing anything because they don't want to provoke a riot?
Listen, I don't care if there is a riot. What I care about is first and foremost arrest those who are gang raping children.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? We'll deal with whatever comes next. But first and foremost, protect our children and arresting those who are gang raping. What might happen is never an excuse to allow a child to be raped.
And burying it under the carpet, that's worked so far, isn't it?
Well, look at the country.
Yeah.
It's on edge. I feel it. You must feel it. It's on edge.
Yeah.
And it's not edge because of people like me talking to people like you. It's on edge because of the political structure and of the climate. And who's created that climate? Have I created the climate? Have you created the climate?
Would you say that's down to political correctness?
So what's political correctness?
So political correctness is the idea that you cannot say certain things for the fear that it might offend someone else. So for example, this conversation here, my point of view would be Islamophobic. You would be a far-right fascist because you disagree with her, or because you...
Well, I have been called racist and far-right in Parliament. So MPs have stood up in Parliament and referred to me.
That's political correctness.
Yeah, well, and I look at that and I say, get stuffed. Yeah. But you've got to have the courage to say get stuffed, because what is your motive? You see, I spent a long time in my career working in what you would traditionally call anti-racist work, and I'm very clear on this. Intention is what determines the meaning of words. If you intend to say something prejudicial, then fine. But most of the time, I've come across people, there's no intent. The intent is to try and have a conversation, is trying to have a discussion, and the use of certain words and the exclusion of certain words, they are barriers that the middle classes and the liberal elites understand, the wokes understand, but the rest of us, stuff it, mate. I couldn't care less. You can use whatever word you want, and it wouldn't upset me in the same way. It's the context, it's the intent, it's the context. I spent a big chunk of my life working with far older people. And they use words that would be now considered to be racist. Did they have any intent in that? Did they, bugger? They're having a conversation with me. We should facilitate the conversation. We should encourage people to speak. And we're not doing that.
Yeah.
And if you say in terms of does political correctness hinder that, I'd go even further. I'd say it's a weapon. Political correctness is a weapon to prevent us from having genuine and meaningful conversations and expressing our fears and anxieties. So I'd say yes, but far more than the way you've tried to share it.
So when speaking to the leader of Parents Against Grooming, Billy Howarth, a lot of these survivors of these rape gangs have been looking for help since around 2012, and they've never received it. What I've noticed is every couple of years, this will come back in the news. Again, recently it's come back in the news. That's not why we're down here. We're down here because of the release of Shabir Ahmed. So
it's due out soon, isn't it?
Yeah, that's why we're here,
Yeah.
and I'll discuss that with you in a bit. But every couple of years this is brought up again, and these girls will always go through people coming to them and saying, "Hey, do you mind doing an interview?" And they in these interviews they ask what happened to them. But after these interviews are done, and after it dies down again, no one seems to care about the girls, and they're forgotten about. The support structures that exist in Rochdale and Oldham, I've been told they exist, but they're not that good, and they need reform. So these girls are left with, after the trauma they go through, they're left with substance abuse issues, alcohol issues, PTSD, the need to self-harm. And
they're
stuff like
damaged, and I don't mean that as a criticism. They're damaged as a consequence of what they've endured, and then the failure of the authorities not just at the time of when they were gang raped, but the failure of the authorities to then put in place a support structure around them afterwards, because the system wants to ignore them because they failed them. Why would you want to support those you failed? Because you see your failures every day. It's far easier to go and work with a child who's been abused in a family home or through neglect or something than these young women who the state had a responsibility for. Because many of them were in care or were known to the care sort of system, and I agree. It's disgraceful, and everyone who asks me, can I put them in touch with a survivor for an interview, I always say no. I say no, because it's not fair. It's not fair, because if I had my way, part of the national inquiry would be not just to take the testimonies of these children, these young women now, but it would be also to make sure that automatically there was some form of compensation scheme set up for them so they could rebuild their lives, and also an entire support package around, counselling and care. But it's not. It doesn't exist. It's piecemeal. It doesn't exist.
Do you think a compensation scheme as well? Because I know a lot of these girls, they still live around Rochdale. And
Yeah, I think a compensation. I think every one of them, because we failed them. The state failed them. They were children. Many of them were children in care. In my town, there are the evidence that we forced out of Andy Burnham. This is evidence that we forced out of him. This isn't evidence that was published. Clearly shows two things to do with children in care, that in terms of the grooming gangs. One, some bright spark in the council decided it would be a good idea to create a children's home where they'd put all the children who were at risk of child sex exploitation in one care home altogether, and then not put in place the support package or the protection package around that. To all extents and purposes, we talked about political correctness, so I'm going to use this term. To all extents and purposes, we created a children's brothel. It's outrageous. And do you know what the report said? An innovative approach. The second thing I'd say with these children is what was clear, and again, it's in the report. It's in the report which is why I try and talk about evidence. Where I've got the evidence, I'll talk about the evidence. In the report, we forced out of them that the grooming gangs were using children that they'd already groomed to identify children who were never involved in CSE and draw them into them. And the term fresh meat has been repeatedly used. It's disgraceful. They were using children to groom other children who were in care. We have a responsibility to make sure these children's lives, these young women's lives, we need to do whatever the state can do, and we should pay. We pay people for all sorts of stuff. Why aren't we paying the children who we failed?
So you actually mentioned an interesting point there about these grooming, these victims of these grooming gangs being used to get other children. Now, I'm going to mention a name here, but this is going to be bleeped out. Who was mentioned in the court documents as taken over from Shabir Ahmed. Now, she was a victim. So I didn't know this at first when we spoke to Billy, because I mentioned the name.
No, she was a victim. Yeah, she was a victim. But, hey, I always try not to judge people unless, imagine wearing their shoes. Can you imagine wearing the shoes of a child who's been groomed and gang raped and caught up in all of that and blackmailed and, and attacked and abused, and the authorities have let them down? And then she has no choice. Yeah. She has no choice in that, does she?
No, she doesn't. Yeah. And this is what I'm saying. When I started doing the research and I came across this woman, I thought, I didn't know who she was. I just heard that she took over from Shabir Ahmed. I asked Billy about it, line of questioning, and it turns out she was a victim all along that was scapegoated. And
well, you know why? To make it look like, it wasn't just the Pakistani men. Yeah. There's an issue. There's an issue, and I get your position. I'd say it's a race issue. You might say it's a religious issue. It doesn't matter. There's an issue with this demographic. And we need to get to the truth. And whatever that truth is, we then have a responsibility as a society to address that, whatever that solution is we need to, we need to go through a process.
Yeah.
And then people have a choice, don't they? You either live in a society that continues to look the other way whilst its children are raped, or you live in a society that has solved the underlying reasons as to why those children are raped.
What do you think the solution is? Because the inquiry line, the problem with inquiry is every time there's an inquiry, there's an uproar about it for about 1 or 2 months, and then it goes quiet. So what do you think the actual solution is after because an inquiry is not going to solve all of our problems. We need something more. So what do you think the solution is?
When we've looked at similar or comparable situations in this country, so there was a rise of terrorism, the rise of young people being drawn towards extremist jihad, sort of, the Islamist stuff. What did we do? We created a national program called Prevent. We put millions of pounds into it. That included a surveillance element where we identified those who were at risk, of getting involved. Okay, so we identified the communities who are at risk. We identified the triggers in that, so what are the risk factors? We identify the risk factors and we go into those communities and work, because you've got to go into the very communities that these gang rapists are coming from, identify the underlying factors as to why they become the way they do, and have those very uncomfortable conversations to address the prejudices that they have wherever they come from and deal with that. So first of all, you've got to cut the supply chain. No one wants to have that conversation. You're talking about, oh, don't you feel sorry for the victims? Or what about this? What about that? First and foremost, in a problem like that, you're going, if you've got a fire, you put the fire out.
So Prevent actually has its own failings. I mean, like this is the thing. We're talking now. So the council, they had an abundance of failings with this rape gang scandal with Norview School and all the other.
But those were political cover-ups. If you look at Shabir Ahmed, right? Let's look at Shabir Ahmed. Shabir Ahmed, we forced out of the most recent Burnham's Assurance Review. This was hidden for all those years until we brought it up.
Yep.
This was hidden. Shabir Ahmed came from Oldham, first and foremost. Yeah, grooming gangs don't operate in the boundaries of a council, do they? Let's be honest. They go where the money is, and they'll go into neighbouring towns and they'll pick up the children where they can. They'll take the children and traffic them to wherever the customer base is. Shabir Ahmed came from Oldham. Shabir Ahmed worked for the council in Oldham. Yep. He worked for the council in a role where he had access to children. Shabir Ahmed was an active member of the Labour Party in the town. Shabir Ahmed was so influential in the town, he sat on the board of the Citizens Advice Bureau. The Citizens Advice Bureau is only where the great and the good get to sit at positions. The positions in the community, if you're standing, then you get to sit on the board with the great and the good.
Yeah.
The police and the council, we forced, had 9 opportunities to arrest and charge Shabir Ahmed. 9 times they let him go. No one will say why those 9 times. Well, I'll tell you why. He was protected.
Yeah.
And he was protected because of his political associations. You look at Knowles V, you look at what happened with Cyril Smith. They all knew. Cyril Smith was protected. He was even protected by MI5. It came out afterwards. MI5 stopped the police from interfering and arresting him.
Yeah.
Powerful men have always been protected.
And what about, so Shabir Ahmed wasn't the only one. There was 3 others within the 9 that were facing deportation, right?
So let's send them back.
This is a good segue, right? So Shabir Ahmed has faced 2 deportation attempts, one in 2016, one in 2019, right? In 2016, he blamed white people trying to scapegoat Muslims.
Yeah.
And in 2019, so the judge reserved judgment. In 2019, the Home Office refused to say whether a decision had been made. Now we found out he's been allowed back in the streets as of next year, and we'll be allowed to access most of Oldham and a few parts of Rochdale, but it's been banned from a few areas. Now we look at the other 3. Now I can't remember their exact names. We'll have them on the screen now.
But they're in Rochdale, aren't they? They're out wandering the streets.
They're out wandering the streets in Rochdale. They haven't been banned. The only reason they haven't been banned is because they aren't known to the public. So while there is a massive issue with powerful men being protected, but it also looks like even the men that no one knows about are being protected.
We are now, as a society, we're having conversations in the mainstream spaces, not in the extreme spaces. We're now having conversations in the mainstream spaces of how foreign nationals should be deported if they're convicted of crimes. It is no longer an extremist viewpoint, is it? Once you'd think, once in society, people think that's an extreme view to have. They might have described it as far right once. As a consequence of where this country now is, we are having those conversations in the mainstream spaces. Now, what we've got to do is make sure that our politicians, particularly those in the opposition who are grandstanding on these issues, follow through over the next few years and commit to legislation. It's easy saying, do this, do this, do this, get you angry, get me scared. No, we all agree on this. I genuinely believe we all agree. If you're a foreign national and you're here and you commit a certain tier of crime, then why would you not deport them? Tell me a reason why you wouldn't.
Why do you think our government is so reluctant to deport these people? I mean, Shabir Ahmed only came here in 1967 at the age of 14.
It's an ideology. It's an ideology of a commitment to a model of multiculturalism that is not working and has not worked for some time.
Right.
That's my analysis of it. That's my analysis of it. Because they would have to admit they're wrong. And politicians, my friend, you're young, they don't like to admit they're wrong.
Yeah, especially career politicians.
Yeah.
Do you believe the survivors will ever get the justice they deserve?
Yes. Yes. We have navigated this far because we've brought a series of campaigning strategies never before seen in this field.
Yeah.
And that is why, because for so too long it's easy to divert and deflect survivors. Oh, wasn't it awful what happened to you? Or, come and tell me a story, or we'll get you some counselling. No, they want justice. And the way in which you get justice is to make sure those who committed the crimes against you and those who allowed those crimes to be committed against you face the full weight of the law. And once that happens, ask anyone who's a victim of crime. Once that happens, then you feel a sense of, okay, I can move forward with my life because those who did these things to me and those who allowed these things to be done to me were held responsible. And we're committed to doing that. Now, look what we've done. It's a national debate now. It hasn't ever happened like this way. And it's happened because a small team of campaigners from a northern mill town hurt the politicians. We worked out how to maneuver this to where it needs to be. And that's why they locked me up. It wasn't because of anything I'm saying to you, it's what I was doing to them.
So according to Maggie Oliver, now I believe, was it only 14 arrests in Rochdale? Because I know after the 9 there was 5 or something like that. But according to Maggie Oliver, there was, despite the small number of arrests, the Greater Manchester Police had over 100 names of people that were never acted on.
Okay, so Greater Manchester Police in Manchester, so she's making reference to it specifically in Manchester, okay? There's a case in Manchester where Greater Manchester Police and the council, Manchester City Council, because the way safeguarding works, there's a partnership there. Yeah. They'd identified 97 members of a grooming gang. The investigation was shut down. We forced from Burnham, Maggie Oliver forced from Burnham in that report, that the minutes of the meeting where it was agreed to shut down this investigation have been lost.
Wow.
Right? The minutes, and I've worked in local authorities, safeguarding minutes are not lost. Right? And Burnham just accepted it. Right? So put that to one side. We know there's a cover-up there. Yeah, we know there's a cover-up. My question to you is this. Why did they shut down that investigation? To protect those 97 men. There's no other reason why you would shut down that investigation. Then I would ask you the question, well, who were those 97 men?
Yeah.
Who were they connected to?
There would have been some big names in the community, just like Shabir Ahmed. Yeah. I mean, that's what I was going to ask you.
And it's outrageous, isn't it? So it's outrageous that a detail such as that, and there were 2 sets of minutes because the police would have had their own details, and nothing gets deleted off that unless you're up to mischief.
It's like police officers losing body cam footage or audio from a body cam footage. It doesn't happen. I mean, they claim this issue is historical. right?
Nonsense.
They claim
Absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
Absolute nonsense. I've spoken to girls who are still being groomed. A friend of mine spoke to me a couple of weeks ago. We grew up in the same place. She's got teenage girls. And I'd gone to see her mother, who'd just returned to the country from overseas. And she clearly waited for me to arrive. And it wasn't to, eat some food with me or check out others. And she wanted a chat afterwards. And I'll share this story with you. She's got, she's a liberal Muslim, yeah? So she doesn't wear the headscarf. She's as integrated as probably people would want, women like her to be. And she shared a story with me of she's got two 14-year-old daughters, or 14 or 15, two teenage daughters. She's had to take them out of school because they were being groomed outside school near the tram stations. Lads were now using vapes as a route to do the grooming.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard of the vape strategy by now. Yeah, they're using vapes.
Yep.
And she was so deeply concerned. The council get involved and wanted to put safeguarding measures in. She refused. She said, "No, I want these men arrested. I want these men arrested." They've even got hold of their phone numbers and the texting. Texting the girls. She gave them the phone numbers. She told them where the men would be. You know what the police said?
What?
You need to go and get more evidence.
More evidence.
And this was November, December. This is as recent as you're going to get.
What I've noticed with young girls, right? So these gangs, they work by getting these girls plied with alcohol. Yeah. These girls go through a rebellious stage. I went through a rebellious stage. We're all young.
Did we not all do it when we're 14, 15, 16? When you discover it, and is that not the time when society has a duty to protect you the most? So there are boundaries around where you can find yourself.
Absolutely. But these girls, they get plied with alcohol. They, these men get them to stay home past curfew, driving a wedge between them and the parents.
But it's a strategy. It's a technique. It's you use the word grooming. It's like a pickup technique that they've got on how to use with children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then I understand that sometimes these girls run away from home to go be with these guys that they feel they're in love with, and the police end up getting called on them. And what happens is when these girls want to report these rapists, the police deem them as not so credible witnesses. Have you got any stories of that happening to young girls that you're in contact with?
There was a survivor called, I think, Victim A in Andy Burnham's report.
Yep.
Victim A reached out to me and gave her testimony to me because Andy Burnham's report refused to speak to any of the survivors. That's how much of a cover-up it was. Let's do a report on child sexual exploitation, but let's not talk to any of the survivors who were victims of child sexual exploitation. But they'd used her as a case study and said, "Here you go, that we're using you as a case study." And she was outraged because the information they had on her wasn't accurate to what her experiences were. So she got in touch with me and said, "Will you, record what I say? Will you make my voice anonymous? And will you put it out there?" And there's definitely many cases where the police turned up and threatened to arrest the children rather than the actual men. 3 men in a room with them, and they, the focus is on abusing the child for what's taking place, and many times in cars where there's a child, a testimony I've shared online, where she talks about the number of times she wished the police would just have took her away and saved her, instead of just laughing at her, whilst men had her in the car, because by then they're trapped. By that point they're trapped, and I don't even know how they get out, mate. I'll be honest with you, I don't know how they get out. If you read any of the diary extracts that have come out from Victoria Goglia, who was killed with heroin, it's these men are barbaric, and I don't care what excuse they use. Whatever excuse they use is wrong, and it's disgraceful. I get emotional because I've sat in rooms with some of these young women, and I can't help but think repeatedly, these are young women who are sharing their testimonies with a man who looks like me, who looked like the men who raped them.
Do they find it more difficult to open up to you because of that?
No, I don't think so. I think they come to me because no one else will listen to them, because the authorities have failed them. The girl, like the young woman I made reference to, because she gave her testimony to me because she wanted it to be shared, the police the next day went and threatened her.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, what more do you want as an example? She suffered horrific abuse. No one had listened to her. There was an investigation into the abuse. They used her as a case study, but never spoke to her.
Yeah.
Never wanted to hear what had happened to her. She wanted to get the story out. I shared that story, and they went and knocked on her door and threatened her.
Wow.
We hope you enjoyed this latest video from Vox Populi. To watch the full video for free, please check out our website, voxpopulimedia.com. Thank you for your support.